In the TV series Game of Thrones, a gruesome event known as the Red Wedding unfolds, where the bride's family massacres the groom's kin during the wedding feast, shocking audiences worldwide. However, the Red Wedding is not merely a work of fiction. History has witnessed a real-life massacre of even greater scale and brutality. On the night of August 18, 1572, along the serene banks of the Seine in Paris, the palace of the Ile de la Cité gleamed with candlelight. A grand wedding was taking place. Margaret of France was marrying Henry of Navarre. Nobles from across the kingdom had gathered to offer their blessings, and the scene was one of harmony and celebration. Yet, beneath this peaceful facade, a sinister plot was brewing in the heart of Paris. Just days later, a horrific massacre would unfold in this romantic city. 70,000 souls would perish, and what had just been a royal wedding of the century would be forever stained with the deep crimson of blood. In the 16th century, Calvinism, a branch of Protestantism, spread into France, appealing to the rising bourgeoisie and aligning with their economic and social interests. As a result, Calvinism gained a strong foothold, and its adherents in France came to be known as Huguenots. Consequently, Calvinism itself became widely referred to in France as the Huguenot faith. The Huguenots and the traditional Catholic establishment in France clashed not only over personal rights and religious beliefs, but also, more crucially, over economic interests and political power. At the time, Catholics controlled most political authority, while the Huguenots, largely composed of the emerging bourgeoisie, had little influence in government. As their wealth grew, the Huguenots began to demand greater political representation, further escalating tensions. Over time, as the Huguenot movement expanded, these conflicts became increasingly severe. The key figures on the Catholic side were Catherine de' Medici and the Duke of Guise. Catherine de' Medici was from the legendary Medici family of Florence, and her father was Lorenzo II de' Medici. At the age of 14, she married Prince Henry of France. After the death of Francis I, Prince Henry ascended the throne as Henry II, making Catherine the Queen of France. Later, Henry II died in a jousting accident, and his son Francis II took the throne, with Catherine serving as regent. The following year, the frail Francis II passed away, and another of Catherine's sons, Charles IX, became king. Catherine continued to rule as regent, and Charles IX became a mere puppet in her hands. A devout Catholic, Catherine de' Medici was also one of the key masterminds behind the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. François, Duke of Guise, was a cousin of Henry II and great-uncle to Charles IX. During Henry II's reign, he earned great military prestige and political influence. A staunch Catholic, he fiercely opposed Catherine de' Medici's compromises with the Huguenots. In 1563, he was assassinated by a Huguenot. After his death, his son Henry inherited his title and became the third Duke of Guise. He wielded great influence among hardline Catholics and played a leading role in the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. On the Huguenot side, the key figures were Henry of Navarre and Admiral Gaspard de Coligny. Henry of Navarre was a cousin of Charles IX. He was bold, ambitious, and inherited vast territories at a young age, including the Kingdom of Navarre, the Principality of Béarn, the Duchy of Albret, and the Duchy of Vendôme. Nearly all of southwestern France was under his control, posing a serious threat to the power of the French monarchy. Furthermore, Henry of Navarre was a devout Huguenot and the highest-ranking leader of French Protestantism at the time. Because of religious conflicts and political tensions, his feud with the French royal family ran deep. Admiral Gaspard de Coligny was a prominent naval commander and a strong supporter of the Huguenot cause, eventually becoming a key leader of the French Protestant movement. In addition to his religious influence, he commanded immense respect in the French military. He often advised Charles IX to rule independently and free himself from Catherine de' Medici's control. For Catherine, Coligny was not only a religious opponent but also a political threat, as he held great power and openly defied her authority. In 1562, while passing through Oissy, the Duke of Guise led a massacre against the Huguenots, marking the beginning of the French Wars of Religion. The following year, in 1563, the Duke of Guise was assassinated by a Huguenot, temporarily bringing the conflict between Catholics and Huguenots to a halt. However, by this point, the hostility between the two factions had escalated beyond reconciliation. In 1568, the Dutch revolt erupted. The Huguenots supported military intervention to aid their Protestant allies in the Netherlands, while the Catholics advocated for backing Spain in suppressing the rebellion. This disagreement reignited tensions, plunging both sides into another fierce conflict. To prevent the situation from escalating into open warfare, Charles IX decided to mediate the conflict through marriage. The chosen couple was Princess Margaret of France and Henry of Navarre, whom we mentioned earlier. Princess Margaret, the sister of Charles IX, was known for her intelligence and beauty, earning the title the Pearl of the Valois. Meanwhile, Henry of Navarre, a young and accomplished leader, controlled vast territories in France. The union between the two seemed like the perfect match. Not only were they well matched in status and appearance, but their marriage was also expected to ease religious tensions between the two factions. However, from the very beginning, both Catholics and Huguenots opposed the marriage. At the time, Pope Pius V regarded Henry of Navarre as a heretic and vehemently opposed the French royal family forming an alliance with him. Additionally, since Margaret and Henry were closely related, their union violated Christian marriage ethics, making papal approval difficult to obtain. Fortunately, Pius V passed away soon after, and his successor, Pope Gregory XIII, saw an opportunity to win Henry over. On the day of the wedding, he issued a special dispensation, allowing the marriage to proceed. On the Huguenot side, Admiral Coligny also opposed the marriage. He believed that Henry should instead seek an alliance with Elizabeth I of England. England had already completed its Reformation and established the Anglican Church, a branch of Protestantism. Not only would their religious views align, but a potential heir from their union could also claim the English throne. However, Henry was more pragmatic than Coligny. He believed that the intensifying conflict between Huguenots and Catholics would inevitably lead to another civil war, further weakening France, a scenario he wished to avoid. In the end, Henry convinced Coligny to support the marriage. With opposition from both factions resolved, the wedding was finally set in motion. To highlight the prestige of both sides and ease tensions among various factions, the wedding was held on an unprecedented scale, with nobles from both camps gathering at the royal palace. The celebration began on August 18th and lasted for 3 days, filling all of Paris with an atmosphere of joy. The hostility between the two factions seemed to fade in the midst of the festivities. However, behind the grandeur of this wedding, a shocking conspiracy was quietly unfolding. And the mastermind behind it all was none other than Queen Mother Catherine de' Medici. Initially, Catherine de' Medici fully supported the marriage, even going so far as to defy the Pope's decree. However, through this union, she came to realize that the Huguenot faction had grown far too powerful to be contained. Moreover, if the marriage succeeded, Coligny would gain even greater influence, further manipulating Charles IX into stripping her of her regency. For the power-driven Catherine, this was unacceptable. Given these considerations, she decided to use the wedding as an opportunity to eliminate Admiral Coligny. On the night of August 22nd, Catherine ordered a fanatical Catholic assassin to attack Admiral Coligny. However, Coligny survived with injuries, and the attempted assassination failed. Enraged, Huguenot supporters demanded that Charles IX launch a full investigation into the incident. When Charles IX discovered that the true culprit behind the attack was his own mother, Catherine de' Medici, he was shocked and furious. In a fit of rage, he struck his mother. However, Catherine quickly regained control of the situation. She exaggerated the threat of Huguenot retaliation, painting a dire picture of an impending uprising. In the end, Charles IX succumbed to her persuasion, and the king raised his sword against the Huguenots. In the early hours of August 24th, as the church bells of Paris tolled, a horrific massacre against the Huguenots began. Led by Henry, Duke of Guise, thousands of Catholic mobs stormed into the homes of Huguenot families, following pre-marked symbols to identify their targets. The beautiful city of Paris turned into a living hell as those who once professed faith in God now became demons of slaughter. The streets ran red with blood, and no one was spared. Men, women, and children alike were butchered without mercy. Dismembered limbs littered the city, and at that moment, nothing mattered but religion. One's faith alone determined life or death. To be a Huguenot was to be a heretic, and heresy meant certain death. The wounded Admiral Coligny was among the first to die. His head was severed. The renowned composer Claude Goudimel also perished in the bloodshed. Prince Henry of Navarre was spared only because his newlywed wife, Princess Margaret, intervened to protect him. However, to save his life, he was forced to renounce his Huguenot faith and convert to Catholicism. By dawn, over 2,000 Protestants lay dead on the streets of Paris. The once peaceful Seine River turned red, its waters clogged with floating corpses. The carnage was so horrific that for many years the French refused to eat freshwater fish, fearing they had fed on the remains of the victims. Since this massacre took place on the feast day of Saint Bartholomew, one of Jesus' 12 apostles, history would forever remember this event as the Saint Bartholomew's Day Massacre. On a saint's feast day, acts of demonic brutality were committed. What a bitter irony! Yet the Huguenot suffering did not end in Paris. Like a plague, the violence spread across France, engulfing major cities such as Toulouse, Bordeaux, Lyon, and Orléans. Massacres erupted one after another, leaving countless corpses strewn across the streets. By the time the bloodshed ceased, between 70,000 and 100,000 Huguenots had been slaughtered. In the wake of the massacre, the Huguenots severed all ties with the Catholic monarchy and rose in open rebellion. In southwestern France, they founded the Kingdom of the Huguenots, reigniting the wars of religion against the Valois dynasty in Paris. Haunted by the guilt of the massacre, Charles IX's mind began to unravel. Tormented by his own conscience, he succumbed to madness and died within 2 years. His younger brother Henry ascended the throne as Henry III, but he managed to extend the Valois dynasty by only a few more years. Like a lingering curse, the Saint Bartholomew's Day Massacre cast a shadow over the Louvre Palace. One king after another died prematurely, and the Catholic faction itself became fractured by infighting and betrayal, leading to a cycle of assassinations and death. Unable to endure the domination of Henry, Duke of Guise, Henry III orchestrated his assassination. But shortly after, Henry III himself was also assassinated. In the end, history took a dramatic turn. The survivor of the Saint Bartholomew's Day Massacre, Henry of Navarre, ascended to the French throne, ushering in the glorious Bourbon dynasty. In 1598, Henry IV issued the Edict of Nantes, granting the Huguenots the religious rights they had fought for over decades. The Catholic majority also agreed to a fragile compromise, bringing more than 30 years of religious wars in France to an end at last. At times, I cannot help but wonder, how can people who worship the same God see each other as demons. Can faith truly drive humans to betray their own nature and slaughter their fellow countrymen? Yet, throughout history, we have seen it happen. The Crusades, the Reformation conflicts, the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre, and even modern ideological battles such as color revolutions and political struggles. Time and again, violence and bloodshed have proven this dark truth. Faith is a peculiar thing. In philosophy, it often stands in opposition to reason. When people choose to believe in something, they abandon independent thought, reducing themselves to irrational beings, easily manipulated by malicious rhetoric, driven by primal instincts of violence, transforming from a disorganized crowd into a raging mob, capable of committing atrocities that would make even demons tremble.